Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is what, class 7 of 8.
Yep.
You're almost there, almost there. I'll be taking roll silently while we get the class started, and watch the chat for messages asking you to confirm the mailing address. Well, I'll be mailing the certificates. Everyone that is here on Saturday for their in-person pruning class will get their certificate and their decal for their car. Everyone else, I'll be emailing you the e-version of the certificate and an e-version of the logo so that you can use on all of your social media and websites, etc. And then I'll be mailing you the hard copies afterward, and that's why I need to confirm your mailing address. So that's everything I have, Claire.
Nice. Okay. The kind of like 13-year-old in me is like, I want a decal.
I'll send you a decal.
Send
Do you
me a
want me?
decal.
Do you want the digital version too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I really just want a sticker to like put on
They're
stuff.
here. I'm like, I have to get them. If they're
Yeah.
not
pretty
stickers.
cool.
They're not stickers.
Oh, they're like the,
they're vinyl.
got
They're
it.
clings. They're more like clings.
We need like patches and stuff too for like.
And a secret
Anyway.
handshake.
Yeah, we need it all, guys. We're gonna develop this little each course. All right. Thanks, Brenda. And yeah, you guys remember Saturday is the optional pruning workshop. Highly recommend it. I mean, I guess I'll just say a disclaimer for this class. So today we're talking about pruning, but you know, so much of pruning is hard to kind of, or it sounds kind of complicated. It's hard to represent on two-dimensional kind of form like we have in the class. So I will try. But yeah, if you can make it out to that, I think it really helps to have things in 3D to really be able to kind of visualize kind of forms of plants and everything like that. So if you can make it, do it. It's the same as the irrigation workshop. I guess we can do a little homework review. I gave 2 homework options last week. If you guys remember, this is the official one that's in your class outline, which is like reviewing that monthly calendar, which is in the back of your, where is it? The back of your, oh no, sorry, it's in class 8. Oh no, class 7? Shit, I can't remember. Anyway, it's the only thing that looks like a calendar in your handbook. But basically it was asking you to kind of look through that, review it, and note any discrepancies, and especially regarding pest stuff. Or the other option was to investigate like a pest you've been dealing with which several of you guys did. And very cool. Does anyone want to share what they found? I can also go through my emails and see and just make you guys share that I saw who already sent me one.
I can share. I just finished doing it.
Cool.
So I had this kind of gray, dusty stuff on the underside of the leaves on my Brussels sprouts, my cabbage, and my kale. And then even in the soil, when I pulled up my Brussels sprouts, they're so big, and then they're real low to the ground. And then I start pulling up the soil, and it's got like almost an inch of gray kind of in the soil. It's like it infiltrated into the soil even.
And it's not like a doesn't look like a small little creature. It just looks like a dust or something.
Yeah, and it's real powdery. So I put here plant type veggies, and I did Brussels sprouts, and then leave sticky / sooty, and leave powdery I chose, and it came up with aphids. So
yeah, I mean that's super common on brassicas. So all the broccoli, and if it gets bad enough, I definitely do see it like kind of what's it called? Yeah, in the soil, you know, like even maybe not like an inch down. That seems pretty intense. But I guess if you actually had enough brassicas, like if you just had a ton of them around, I guess I could see that happening.
My soil's pretty loose too.
Okay. So yeah, they got space to hide in there. Yeah, a lot. I mean, honestly, aphids is a big one, and they come in so many different kind of shades. And especially with vegetables, but especially in I would say like newer gardens, like especially when they've transitioned recently, the first year, I tend to see aphids happening pretty frequently, you know, in our plants. So, I mean, obviously
I haven't seen the predator insects yet. So we'll see, but I have native plants, you know, all over mixed in with my vegetables. I do vegetable gardening and
Yeah.
Anyways, so thank you.
Yeah, cool. I do
The
think
tool is very cool. I really like the tool.
yes. Oh my God. I
that
love
tool.
that tool.
I'm
Like I
gonna
feel,
start using it all the time now.
yeah. I find
Oh.
that every time I have to prep for this class, I go and I have to open it up so that I can, have the link for you guys during the class. And I always kind of go down a wormhole of being like, oh yeah, what about this one? And just kind of get lost. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it is a great tool. At least it helps you narrow down. Sometimes the pictures aren't very accurate, but it like really helps you zero in on some options. What was I gonna say? Yeah, so aphids. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think especially with those new gardens transitioning, Jason was talking about vegetables, but aphids definitely, I see them more frequently, on like a newly transitioned native garden, also on the tips of sages and stuff, and especially if someone has been fertilizing with like a synthetic fertilizer, even if it's a low dose kind of fertilizer, that extra nitrogen stimulates growth, and you tend to see aphids kind of being like, oh, I'll take that new vegetative growth. So yeah, definitely something you see. What about anyone else have anything to share? I want to look at I can't actually go there without changing the whole screen. But because we talked about cochineal in the last class, and I think we talked about them being mealy bugs, and then someone looked it up, or someone sent it in their
yeah, Claire, that was me, Devin.
Yeah, would you share what you found?
Yeah, so I knew they were cochineal, but I just was curious kind of what it said.
Yeah.
And so when I went through the diagnostic tool, it came up as mealy bugs. But then when I just kind of did research and looked through it, like through the UCANR.edu page.
Right. You can even just search it in their search tool or something.
Yeah. It separates scale and mealy bugs into two separate categories.
Yeah.
And it called them cochineal scales.
Yeah.
Which I just thought was kind of interesting.
Super interesting, because like right when you sent that, I immediately was like, oh wait. And I Googled it the same, looking up the UCIPM, and I was like, oh my God, that does make sense that their scale, they just are a scale with like a waxy kind of mealybug-like covering, because scales can be so many different colors. So I was like, oh, that's great, because it makes more sense as a scale because they're less mobile. When they're on your Opuntia, typically you don't see them moving around. Not that mealybugs move that much, but they do move a little bit more.
Yeah. Actual cochineal beetles, the ones that are on Opuntia, live out their entire life cycle on the Opuntia.
Yeah.
That's what I thought was more interesting, is like to see the life cycle information on there was interesting, because I've had the problem with them. We see them all around, and I pop them and rinse them off, etc. But to see the life cycle, that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, if you're getting actual cochineal, you should be only getting it on Opuntia. It's not really damaging the plant. Traditionally, they're harvested, dried, and either mashed up or boiled to make a red dye. So there's so there's value in having that.
It is on an Opuntia, but it does cause, if I leave them on there for a long time, it does have some chlorosis on there, and they start to get like light green spots.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I like to get them off.
Yeah, you got to start like a dyeing company.
I know when I first left them there, I was like, well, how many does it take?
I always have this this is when I have some dumb idea about projects that I never have time for, but I'm like, I'm going to naturally dye these shorts or whatever. And I always think I'm going to collect all the cochineal, but still haven't done it.
Yeah.
But
and they don't have a lot of predators because they taste gross.
Yeah. They're like supposed to be really bitter, right?
They are.
Yeah. Okay.
If I kill a bug, I eat it.
Yeah, nice. Protein. Man.
Sure.
Yeah. That it's, if you've ever had red icing, red frosting, that's what it tastes like. It's just really bitter and gross.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I believe, Devin, that we talked about it with mealybugs, because we were talking about mealybugs in the last class, and then and I think I just never really thought about it, because I think of it as the beetle, and I didn't really think about like what's it actually, or how do they categorize it, at least in IPM. So yeah, anyone else want to share? I know there was a couple aphid entries. What else was there? Oh, Netta, you had an interesting one. Are you here, Netta?
Yes, I'm here.
do you want to share what you don't have your picture, but I think you can explain
Oh.
it. It's kind of an interesting example.
Yeah, so at Theodore Payne, there's I think it's a Manzanita TPF Blue. And I was actually talking to Tim about it today, and he said that every summer it just looks super gnarly with like this like black soot. And he was kind of saying how like there's certain Manzanitas, like the Glaucas, that have this like stickiness to them. And so things just like tend to stick. So it could even be like some of it just like the poor air quality, and it's just like on the side of a road. So it's like collecting all this dust. But I did see kind of these black scales towards the bottom. And yeah,
You mean at the base of the plant?
No, sorry, on the bottom of the leaves.
Got it.
Just on the leaves and the stem that it was just like a gross kind of like soot layer.
Yeah. Yeah. So for anyone, sorry, I'm just gonna, since no one else saw the photo but me and Netta, it's basically like it's a manzanita, and the stems are kind of like sooty covered-ish, like almost like, you know, like, yeah, they came out of like a chimney or something, looking a little bit sooty. But and then also on the leaves there's like little small larger but still very small kind of like dots that are like black and sort of whitish on the underside of it. But then there's the covering on the stems and kind of the leaf margin that looks like smaller dust kind of flecks all over it.
Yeah, and then I was also noticing some sort of webbing that was like going on.
Oh, okay. I think I read it wrong. I thought you said that you didn't find webbing. So I think I misread what you wrote. But yeah, so it's like it could be multiple things going on, because Netta looked up on the sorry, you tell us what you did.
Oh yeah, I just looked through the diagnosis tool, and it kind of narrowed it down to like 5 different things, but it looked most similar to thrips, or no, sorry, to whitefly. But I was like, oh, it's black. And then there was this part saying that the whiteflies, when they parasitize, they turn black.
Yeah, so when they get parasitized, they actually turn black. And so I think that's a really interesting example, because I think especially when we have the name of the pest and it's something like whitefly or red mite or whatever, we kind of stick with that. But oftentimes, like she found with the diagnostic tool, that if it's been parasitized, so some predator wasp has shown up, parasitized this whitefly, they can turn black. And what else did you find?
I forget. I think I took like a
well like what I remember too from yours was that not only can, when they're parasitized, excuse me, the whiteflies, when they're parasitized, they can turn black. Some, when they're parasitized, they don't turn black. And then even some of the nymph kind of larval instar phases of whitefly can be sort of black in color. So you could have an active one or parasitized one. So just seeing black doesn't mean it's not whitefly. So I think that was a great example, because Netta found this like kind of weird looking dots on the leaf, in addition to this like potentially sooty mold that was happening, because that might be the blackness that's kind of all over the stems. And then even UC IPM's diagnostic tool mentioned that the whitefly also kind of suck the like sap out of the leaves and secrete a honeydew, kind of like all the other ones basically. And that honeydew kind of all over the leaves can create like a sooty mold situation. So she could potentially have whitefly, she could have a whitefly that's parasitized, whitefly that's active, larval instars with an additional sooty mold. And like she was saying, she talked with Tim, because it is on the Theodore Payne site, that potentially this is like a seasonal thing that happens to this plant. You know, so do you know what the management strategies are, or is it just to kind of like let it go because it doesn't harm the plant?
Yeah, I mean, the plant seems really healthy. It's a mature plant, and I think Tim's attitude about a lot of things is just let it be.
Yeah,
because it does seem like a seasonal thing, and there's just a lot going on with just what it looks like, that I think.
I think that's it's a great example of like, there's so much going on, but if nothing, if the plant looks healthy, like you're saying, then you don't need to do anything. So I think sometimes people see pests and they're like, oh my God, I gotta do something about it. But if it's not actually like hindering the plant's growth or killing the plant, sometimes it's like, you can just leave it, especially if it's not like a aesthetically or an aesthetic need by the client. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, and you brought up the thing that I just wanted to highlight. That was a very good point that you said earlier, which is the Arctostaphylus glauca. They have, very like almost like sticky hairs, really tiny sticky hairs all over the fruit, the stems. They're kind of have a little bit more of a sticky body, I guess. And you mentioned sometimes that those pollutants or dust along the roads. I know where I am, we have a lot of Arctostaphylus glauca. And yes, always the edge effect of the ones along the dirt roads have a lot of dust that's kind of just stuck along the stem. And it looks like that picture you showed, which is like right on the kind of sticky end of it almost, it's black. So so I guess it would have been smart if I just copied and pasted your photo into the class, but I didn't know who was going to share. But it was just a really interesting example. And I just want to encourage you guys to think about sometimes, even if there's a lot going on or something is, I don't know, looks really messed up, or there's a lot of different quote unquote pests happening, if it's not affecting the plant and the client doesn't mind, you can just identify it on on UCIPM's website and then, walk away and leave it if it's not doing anything. So I will get into pruning now. Jason, you have yes, Jason, you sent me a direct message that says, if we have time, I think we should have time at the end of this class. I will share my Go for Success story. It's really my hidden talent. It's insane. I wish I could like make real money off of it because I feel like it's a gift. But anyway, but yeah, Jason, remind me at the end so I don't forget because I don't have the best memory. Okay, so pruning, we should have time. Basically, just we're going to talk about the techniques, the different seasons for pruning. We'll go into like some specific examples, but this is more general and talking about tools and things like that. And I'll try to make it as useful as possible. But like I said, I think the in-person is really, really more helpful. But I should say that, what did I want to say? Okay, well, I can't remember. So either way, we'll start with the reasons to prune. So you always want to have a reason to prune, like think about your goal when you're pruning. And some of the main reasons would be rejuvenation. So rejuvenation includes stimulating new growth, removing any unproductive growth, if it's like some woody bit that's just not growing anything on it, or maybe extending the bloom season. That would be kind of rejuvenation potentially. But yeah, stimulating new growth, removing not, kind of older growth would be the rejuvenating kind of reason. Aesthetics is a lot, encompasses a lot. As in terms of a reason to prune. You can also kind of consider this shaping because this would include basically like pruning to get a specific form out of the plant, or maybe like redirect the growth somehow. So maybe it's growing naturally, but it's sort of lopsided and you want it to be a little bit aesthetically more symmetrical. So that would be more of a shaping aesthetic reason to prune. And that could also be like specifically trying to encourage more laterals to come out of a plant, so it's not so straight up and down, but these would be aesthetic kind of shaping choices. And, or even if it's just like you want to train something into a hedge as opposed to like a small shrub or a tree form, or maybe it's just exposing an attractive feature, like manzanitas have that very structural kind of, the manzanita kind of tree forms have that structural iconic look. And you might be pruning to kind of expose that more. So that would be more aesthetic. And maybe accentuating its natural habit, like it's a natural growth habit, maybe already has that, but you're just kind of trying to accentuate it, or potentially training it. So maybe trying to train the plant. Those would be like shaping and aesthetics reasons. Then there's plant health, which you want to start with the 3 Ds. So remove the 3 Ds first, which would be dead, diseased, or damaged vegetation. Do that first, because any rejuvenation or shaping stuff, you can kind of see it once you've actually removed dead, diseased, or damaged stuff. My kind of pruning, or actually like he was a vegetable garden teacher, but he's my mentor with pruning, actually would say the 4 Ds. And he called the 4th one either deranged or disoriented, which means crossed branches. So any crossed branches, dead, diseased, damaged, if you want to be 4 Ds, I would remove those first, because those are just kind of getting in the way, potentially causing problems if it's diseased, and dead, you don't need it. So removing the 4 or 3 Ds. I always like to use the 4 because I just love the idea of calling plants deranged, because it feels like such a human term. But anyway, so that would be first kind of the things you remove. But plant health can also mean removing or pruning to improve air circulation. You know, if we have a situation where we're not getting appropriate air circulation, you might want to prune to open it up, or even to compensate for a space that's like, been overplanted. That would be plant health reason. What else? Like, mitigating any kind of damage that's been caused. That would kind of, I guess, fall under damaged vegetation. But yeah, or potentially just removing something that's an actual disease, or removing like mistletoe, for example, something that actually affects the plant. That would be plant health. And then this last one isn't really, I didn't really know where to put it. It could be aesthetics or plant health, I guess. But essentially, also you're just pruning sometimes to just keep branches and debris out of pathways, or just for human use needs. So those are kind of the 4 main reasons to prune. And I'm going to talk now about the ways to prune, so the different pruning techniques. And I just want to say that you kind of always want to have an objective in mind when you're pruning. And it just because there's a pruning system for this doesn't mean it's necessary. So you always want to have an objective in mind when you're pruning, and ask yourself, like, what is it I'm trying to achieve with this cut, or what am I trying to achieve here with this plant? And then ask yourself, what kind of plant is this? And that is going to dictate what technique, like what pruning technique you use. So we're going to go through the different techniques, but it's not just about using every technique here that's listed for each plant. It's about, like, do I need this technique? What do I want to achieve with this plant? What's necessary? Because really, this is going to depend on your goal and what type of plant it is, the technique you use. The one thing I guess we can say is you want to, especially with larger trees, but it actually goes for all shrubs, because I guess I'm not getting there, which is, we try to avoid the nesting season with pruning, which is typically from February to August, which is, and like June being the peak. But sometimes you have to prune in that time frame. Typically with larger trees, you would stay outside of that nesting period. But our wildlife and our birds do make nests in smaller shrubs that we wouldn't consider a tree, and even on the ground. So just being cognizant of that, if you are pruning, always like get in there and make sure there's not like, a nesting family in there. Okay, so the first kind of method would be deadheading. And this is just removing the individual spent flower, so the kind of exhausted, old and ugly flower, removing that, or the whole flower cluster that's already spent, depends, on the plant, and doing that before the seeds mature. So that, it makes sense. That can prolong the flowering season for usually annuals and non-woody perennials, which means, like, in those cases, like for, I'm trying to think of an example. I can't, like, Clarkia or something like that. If you're removing the flowers before the seeds start to mature, you can actually get some more blooms off of it. So it can prolong the bloom season. But in the case where maybe the plant doesn't have that ability to kind of continue to rebloom, you would still maybe do it just for a tidier kind of look to it. So it can potentially elongate the blooming season for a plant, but it has to be usually a plant that can actually have an extended blooming season, or you're just doing it to kind of keep it more tidy. So for example, here we have the Eriogonum blisianum, which is the cross between St. Catherine's lace and Santa Cruz Island buckwheat. And you can see on the left, it's before it's been deadheaded. And the whole flower cluster that's dry has just been removed all the way back to the green new growth. So you can see they didn't just cut off just the tip, because there's no dead sticks left over. So make sure you remove the entire cluster, the dry ones. And then here you can see they left the kind of green ones that have not opened yet. So this would be, essentially deadheading. And in this case, the buckwheats, of course, there's some flowers that are going to continue to bloom, but there's not going to be a new flower that grows from here afterwards, typically, from the area that you already clipped. So this isn't going to along the blooming season, but it will give it a tidier look. Here's another example of Cleveland sage, the whirly blue variety. Again, pre and post, and you can see all these kind of dead seed heads or dried seed heads on it. And you could potentially clean this up or, deadhead it, but you can also leave those seed heads on as long as possible so that you can provide food for seed eating birds. So it can also be bird food. So again, this goes back to always have an objective in mind when you're pruning. Just because you see dry seed heads doesn't mean you have to go, oh, I got to deadhead it. It really depends on the goal. If you have a client who's like, I love birds, I want my garden to be a bird habitat, wildlife habitat, then I would stick with the left-hand one for as long as possible, or potentially clip them off, deadhead them off when they're really crispy and dry, let the seed fall out, and even cut it and leave it on the ground so that any seeds that are left over stay on site. But maybe on the right-hand side would be a client that's like, no, I want it to look really clean and manicured. It's for my front yard or something. It's my parkway for my HOA, and I really don't want it to look like dried and crispy because that's not allowed in my HOA or something like that. So again, very much depends on who we're talking to. So they each can be utilized. And then lastly, again, this is like an Encelia farinosa that potentially could be in need of some deadheading or not. It's just about, the goal and habitat or not. And I think when we're thinking about these kind of dead plant material, it's obviously could potentially be food for birds, but also all this dry dead material is also kind of like, it's not just for birds and seeds, also little pollinators, insects and stuff use this as material for housing and habitat, or birds use it for nesting material. So it's not just about bird seed, it's like also habitat, the dead material. So there's this balance of leaving some dead material if you want to have a habitat with also fire safety, because obviously if you just leave all the dead material on your plant, especially if you're in the kind of wildland urban interface, it's maybe a fire hazard. So again, we have to think about our objectives, like where is this located? Is the fire safety more important than the bird food or bird habitat or wildlife habitat, I guess I should say. Okay, so there's also mowing. Mowing is pretty standard, using a lawnmower to cut down plants. Usually we see this with grasses. You can use it on epilobium and yarrow later in the season. And again, the goal with mowing is just to kind of create that lawn look. So a little more manicured appearance and just makes the lawn look more like a lawn, I suppose. Here's an example of an epilobium that has been string trimmed, which is essentially like mowed, but you can cut it all the way back like this, especially after. So usually we do this like around New Year's with epilobium. Basically they flower late in fall and then they start to dry up, and then you'll see it's kind of like this big brown mess. And then there's a little bit of green growth at the very bottom. So you can cut it back down to the ground to like an inch above the ground, 2 inches, and it will totally fill back up once the springtime comes on. It fills all back up again. And this is, I guess I don't want to say typical, but it's more possible to mow like an epilobium or some kind of more fleshy rhizomatous shrub. So it's harder with a woody shrub. There's not very many examples of woody shrubs where we can mow them, but something like I said, this, what's it called? Epilobium can take it, yarrow. I'm trying to think of another example. You could cut down, I wanted to clarify, here it says mowing or coppicing. We're gonna get to coppicing, but mowing is typically for softer green fleshy leaves, and coppicing is for woodier plants, but they're essentially the same concept. You're cutting it all the way back. So you might say you're mowing or coppicing a Matalia poppy, for example. You can cut those back all the way down to like 6 inches also. Okay, mowing, right. I should talk about the grass part. Yes?
So coppicing is the string trimmer? I just wanted to understand what the
coppicing is woody. I have a slide for it. I'll get to it. It's basically like cutting down to the ground a more mature, woodier plant. And mowing is essentially using a lawnmower or any kind of machine to just cut it all the way down to the ground. And typically it's with like softer, I'm forgetting the word, like herbaceous kind of plant, like grass.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So grasses, when we're mowing them, if it's being used as a lawn, you kind of have to treat it like a lawn. So you have to mow it a bit more regularly. But if you're using your grass like as a bunch grass, you know, or it is a bunch grass that's more, you kind of treat it more seasonally. So you can still mow it, but in terms of how often it would change. So it really depends on if it's a cool or warm season grass. And typically when we refer to cool or warm season, that's referring to the season, it's growing season essentially. So when is it really the most green? When can its seeds germinate is actually, I think, like the technical term, but it's usually when the plant can germinate, when it's doing its most growth, when it's the greenest. So cool season grass would be doing that in the cool season, and the warm season grass would be doing that in the warm season. So our pruning for them will be different because they green up at different times of the year. And typically what the kind of general rule is, you want to cut them, you know, prune them, or mow them, whatever, cut them right before they start to green up again. So for the cool season, and again, I'm talking about bunch grasses. If it's a lawn, you're kind of doing it sort of regularly. But so back to this, if it's cool season grass and I'm doing it right before it gets green, if it's a cool season, it's kind of like fall, because basically winter starts and that's when it's going to start greening up. So like right before it's going to get all green again. And typically it looks like it's most shitty, essentially, you know, right before that period when it perks back up. And then if it were the warm season grass, again, it's right before it's kind of peak season. So that would be late winter, spring, because it's going to get better looking and green up sometime in early summer, you know, or maybe late spring. So in the case with a warm season grass, you want to cut it, you know, kind of winter, spring. And the example here that we have a photo of is the canyon prints, the Elmas Canyon prints. That would, you can see on the left, this is prior to cutting it back. So this is probably fall. And you can see it's kind of floppier. It's like got the more blue color. The blue kind of comes from the higher temperature. So usually when it grows, it's kind of greener and in the cooler season. And then as summer goes through, it gets a bit more blue. But you can also see it's just kind of floppy and got some dry leaves in there. So they just mowed it. You can see the zoomed in version and the unzoomed in version there at the top. And yeah, it's just cut back to a couple inches. And then, you know, by the time, you know, it starts back up with fall, it's already kind of greening up. Sorry, not fall, in the cool season. So winter, it's already kind of a fresh new thing. So it just, you can see there's a little bit of the dead from when it was mowed, but it's a very easy technique to use for cool and warm season grasses. Some other examples of cool season grasses would be California fescue, purple needle, Malika imperfecta is another cool season grass that likes the shade. California oat grass, these Elmas there's also Elmas cinereus. That sounds wrong. Anyway, those are some other cool seasons. Sedges or like carex, they're not actually grasses, they're grass-like and they're kind of more evergreen, but you can kind of treat them as a cool season if you're doing the pruning. And then our warm season grasses would be deer grass, Spirabolus aeroides, blue grama, the budaluas, and like purple threon. And if you, I think Theodore Payne actually on their grasses, on their database, they say if it's warm or cool. So that just helps you with pruning, especially with mowing with the grasses. So edging is another technique to use. And this is just essentially just pruning any ground cover back to the edge or, the edge of a pathway or a sidewalk or any hard edge. And again, this is just to kind of give it a neat appearance. With our kind of softer bodied herbaceous things like yarrow or maybe like a fragaria, the strawberries, you can use like a string trimmer and just go across the line like you would with like a lawn, you know, just go by on the edge. But in the case of a woodier kind of evergreen subject like this, like the Baccharis pilularis pigeon point, you actually want to cut back the stems unevenly into the main body of the plant. And you can see that gives it a more natural appearance instead of just like a sharp edge. And also if I were to just go through here and just like cut a straight line across this edge of this pathway. With our woodier plants, you basically create like a dead zone, because you'd cut there and then the new growth would go upwards. So you'd kind of have this like dead zone with new growth above it. So you do have to cut back into the main body and stagger it kind of to make it have this more natural look. Because like I said, you'll just create like a weird dead zone on your plant. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh yeah, I think I have another example. Yeah, so this would be another Ceanothus Yankee point. Again, you can see you can have a pretty clean edge, but you still are cutting into the main body with this. And here, again, if I just cut this with like a string trimmer, just over and over and over again, you'd start to have this like dead zone here that you could visibly see, and the new growth going upward, because you'd be kind of discouraging the plant from growing in this area. And it would look really, messed up, you know, it wouldn't look very nice. Okay, so we have thinning or lifting. Some people call it selective pruning, but essentially this is just eliminating an entire branch or stem, you know, just completely removing it out, pruning it out. And this is usually an activity you're starting to do as a plant matures more, you know, it's not typically something you're doing in the first year. But the reasons you might do it is to, you know, this is kind of, you're getting into the shaping kind of things. So this is when you might be opening the structure for more air circulation, maybe more light, maybe to create some desired shape you want. Maybe you're removing dead material for aesthetics or fire safety, like it says here. Just removing whatever dead, deranged, you know, the 4Ds. This is thinning is just completely removing the branch. And you want to, did I want to say something about that? I think I have this slide, do I? Yes, okay, so when you are cutting a branch, you want to make sure you kind of cut it at an angle and you leave the branch collar, which is this kind of like, here it's depicted as these like little armpit wrinkles, but it is kind of like the armpit of this branch, and you want to make sure you keep this intact, because in the branch collar, there's all these cells that actually contain, or they actually are the cells that go and fix and heal wounds on a tree. So when you remove it, you make it harder for them to kind of heal their wound. And also, if say you were to cut it like straight down, which is not what you want to cut it at an angle and leave this kind of branch collar here. But if you were to cut it straight down, you're actually cutting a larger wound and a much larger surface area wound. So it's slower to heal. Not only is it slower to heal because of the size, but also because you've destroyed the kind of area that is responsible for kind of fixing that wound. I'm not saying if you cut that off, it can't heal itself. It's just much slower. And so here on the left, you can see if it's a smaller branch, you know, something that's like less than 3/4 inch diameter. Yeah, you can use loppers or your pruners, you know, your hand shears. But when it gets larger, you know, like it's an inch big or something, or more, you know, an inch or two, or, you know, a couple inches, that's when you want to use the 3-cut approach. And you can see, oh, there you go. You can see here, the first cut is the one in the middle here, and you go on the underside and you just kind of go halfway in. And then the second cut is outside of that. And the idea here is that you're kind of ensuring that you lop off the main weight of the branch. So say this is a really large branch with a bunch of leaves on it. This ensures that if the branch, like when I start to actually cut this through the second one, a lot of times the weight of the branch starts to pull it and it just falls naturally, right? And it just rips. Oh my gosh, hypersensitive mouse. So if it were to rip, this little cut kind of is the insurance, and it stops it from ripping further. And then you do your third cut. And that just means by the time you're doing your third cut, you just have this like little stump that you cut off, so it's not so weighty. And because if you were to just cut it, the first and only cut be right here, you risk that ripping and the weight of the branch ripping off at this point, and then it would actually rip down this point, the branch collar point of the tree. And that would be detrimental, again, to the tree's ability to heal itself. So again, when it's a bigger, larger branch, you want to do the 3-cut method so that you are, you know, kind of helping the tree heal itself. And again, you always want to cut at this angle so that if rain is falling, it just sheds right off. You don't want to cut like over here, like just a straight cut like this, because water will just sit on that little point, and that, you know, can lead to infection and things like that. Okay, still with thinning and lifting. So it can be something really simple, excuse me, like here with this, what's it called? Island snapdragon. You can see that dead branch there. It's just sticking out, and all you have to do is go all the way back to its origin and just remove it. And you can see that's just the difference that's happened in this photo. It's all the same. You're just removing the dead branch. And again, it's like removing the 4 Ds. Sometimes pruning is all, that's all it is, you know, and that's considered a thinning cut. Also, you can use thinning for a more kind of a larger plant, like than the island snapdragon. And in this case, it might be for removing over vigorous growth. So we have here on the left, laurel sumac, the Malosma laurina. That one in front, or you can see like all these like kind of branches kind of shooting out at the camera. And you can't see, but there is a Hespero yucca whipplei, a chaparral yucca right there that's kind of being smothered. And all that vigorous growth is just too much, and it's taking over the space of this yucca. So what they did was just remove that those vertical branches that were kind of overly vigorous, so that to give more space. And so again, just removing the entire branch at its origin, and that would be the thinning cut. Same thing here. This is Sambucus. You can't really see where the cut was made. Again, the photos aren't super helpful for that. But I think generally you can see that you see less of the pathway on the left side, less of the trunk of the plant, even though it's kind of a multi-trunk elderberry. And basically this, whoever pruned this just went back to the origin of the branch and just removed the whole branch out completely. And now you have access to the pathway. So again, thinning can just be maintenance, you know, it's just thinning is lifting is a weird thing I was gonna say. But yeah, so that would be thinning, or selective pruning also it's called. Some of these terms, different books say different things, but once you read what it actually is, you're like, oh, that's just thinning, or that's just a selective pruning. So pinching, or you'll see it as tip pinching too. This is when you are just removing the tip of the stem when there's new growth or right after it's flowering. So new growth or recently flowered, you're just removing the full stem. Sorry, the full stem, just the tip of the stem. And you can see here, like you typically are removing the whole tip. And I would encourage you to not just pinch it right at this part, but pinch it to the next set of leaves or the next node or growing tip, you know, whatever's the next kind of, the next pair of leaves or growing node. And instead of leaving just like, if I were to prune it right here, I'd have kind of like a little dead stick. So you want to make it closer to the actual next pair of leaves. And again, it doesn't have to be here. It just depends on what your goal is. If you wanted to cut it back even more, you could do it to this pair of leaves, you know, but just making sure you're not doing it in the middle. And this is something we do to encourage like a denser growth habit, because once you pinch this is going to encourage these two growing points to grow out and, you know, kind of branch out. And these ones and going downward, actually, mostly from the first two, but it actually kind of encourages growth a bit downwards too. So you're actually encouraging it to branch out at all these points as opposed to just be one long stem. And that's when we want to create like a fuller plant, you know, a denser plant. And this is really, really important with usually just our young plants. In fact, most of your young plants and perennials, if they're new in the garden, you can do some tip pinching to them to encourage this fuller branching kind of growth habit, but especially important with our sages in the first couple of years of its life. This is so that we can avoid crown splitting, which I think I've mentioned before, but if I didn't, crown splitting is basically really more common like with our sages, which is when they start having new growth, they send out these long, you know, new growth stems that are really vigorous, or they're big flower stalks on a white sage. You know, they have those big long flower stalks, and you know, they have all this big long kind of top heavy growth that's very heavy, especially for a new plant that's not that wide or densely branched. And what happens is with all that new weight, they actually just split open down the center. So that's crown splitting. And that is very difficult to kind of recover from. I mean, sometimes they'll recover, but a lot of times they're lopsided, you know, for the rest of their life. So you want to do the pinching to create like a nice low dense growth habit that's stronger also, you know. So it's not just about the growth habit, but the strength that it infuses to the lower branches below. And with that, you know, if it's denser and wider, it kind of has a better base, you know, to grow from. Okay. So reduction cuts or heading back. That's all. There's lots of different terms for it, but heading back, heading cuts, reduction cuts. Okay, before I get into explaining that little sentence there, it's essentially just cutting a portion of the end of the branch. So if my arm here is a branch, it's just cutting a portion off. It's not cutting my whole arm off. It's just cutting just the, some portion of the branch off. But whereas a thinning cut would be like removing the entire arm, right? But anything along the way would be considered a reduction or heading cut. Sorry for like the really gruesome example, but that's all I had. So yeah, just cutting some portion of it. And in this example, or in this slide, it says cutting a terminal leader branch or stem back to a lateral one, which is, and typically that lateral one is a third of the size of the branch that you're cutting or more. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but essentially this is a leader terminal branch. The branch comes from the center, it goes all the way to the end. It's not it's the main kind of branch. Whereas lateral branches are the ones that come off the side. These are all lateral branches. They don't go back to the base of the plant. So this is a terminal branch, that big long one. And these guys are laterals. So if I want to cut a terminal, if I'm cutting a terminal branch, so the end of a branch, you're cutting it back to a lateral. Again, like the tip pinching, you want to make sure there's growth or some kind of lateral, what did I use it for the tip pinching? The pair of leaves. In this case, the laterals are the other growing branches. So I cut it back to that point. And typically you want to make sure when you're cutting this terminal branch that its thickness is the lateral thickness is a third of the terminal branch's thickness. So a third in diameter. I have a close-up photo in the next one to kind of show it a little bit better. And the idea is if it's too large, like if you have a branch that's this thick and you just cut it back to a skinny little lateral, that little lateral can't absorb that kind of regrowth. So what ends up happening is just a ton of regrowth at that cut point, which is like a water sprout. And you might see that a lot on kind of like street trees. Sadly, they get kind of butchered in that way. And again, if you're not cutting to the appropriate size lateral, that can happen. I'm going to show you the next photo, but I just want to explain here what's happened. This is kind of hard to see. You can see this is kind of a lopsided Prunus ilicifolia. It almost looks like a tilted Christmas tree. You see this shape? It goes all the way up to there. And again, so my goal or my if I'm thinking about what's my objective, I want to balance this tree out a bit. I want to redirect the growth to go on the left side a bit more. I want it to encourage the laterals to take over a bit more and discourage this like shooting up terminal leader, right? I want it to be a little more balanced. So what they did here is they just cut this back to a lateral, which we'll see in the next slide. But you can see if I just generally kind of put my mouse around the shape of it, it's much more symmetrical. I mean, it's not perfect, but that's not the idea. Is now that I've cut this off, the rest of the tree will start to kind of absorb the regrowth and start to put energy into these lower laterals. And also when you cut back, when you do reduction cuts, it encourages the growth in the side, the side lateral stems, but it also encourages their girth. So like it basically can thicken them up. So that's kind of what we mean by encouraging growth, not just in length, but it actually thickens them up too. And it just kind of shoots the growth. You kind of think of the tree as like energy, and you've removed all this energy going upwards. So it has to go somewhere. So it kind of moves to other parts of the tree. And typically it's just the lower laterals that you cut to, but it can also start to kind of create this, balance it out a bit. So yeah, like it says here, putting more energy into the weaker side of the plant. So here's the same tree, and the cut you can see, here's where they actually cut it. And this is that terminal leader branch. You can see the thickness of it. And then the lower laterals that it was cut to, these are all laterals here. In fact, these are also laterals, but the photo doesn't show it. There's one coming off right in the behind this too. But you can see the lateral, like if this isn't a lateral, it's about a third the thickness of this terminal leader. And that's what we're talking about. You want to make sure the lateral is a reasonably sized thing, a third or more. If this was like, 12 feet across and you cut it to a lateral of this size, it's going to just like, this little lateral can't absorb that. So you just have a ton of growth popping off the top, which is not what you're going for. So again, it's going to create thicker growth here and not going to encourage water sprouts. So that's what we want. And oh, and also, I guess you can't really see it, but it's, again, we want that 45-degree angle. This kind of looks like it's flat, but it's not. I know it's actually like at a 45-degree angle. You know, so if water falls on it, it's not just sitting there on a flat kind of table, it's shedding off. Is there something else I wanted to say about this? Oh, with reduction cuts in general, you want to make sure you're just keep, like when I use my mouse to kind of go around the air, like that whole kind of general shape of the whole plant. You really want to keep in mind the whole shape of the plant when you're doing reduction cuts, because you're not just like going in there deadheading everything. You know, you're kind of imagining, what do I want to do from this? So making sure you're actually looking at the whole picture of the plant and whole shape, and thinking about its growth habit. Is this like an upright grower? Is this more of a, you know, is this like a more bushy type grower? So that you're really thinking about what's the tree's response going to be when I make this cut. And let's see, can be, yeah. And again, you can cutting back to these nodes, always cutting back to a growing node or tip or lateral. This picture doesn't really show it, but I know there's one right behind it. But yeah, you wouldn't normally want to just cut it and leave like a stem sticking out. You want to make sure you're actually cutting it cleanly to a lateral. Okay, so coppicing, which we mentioned a little bit before, similar to mowing, but with coppicing, it's a more, this is with an already established plant. You're cutting a woody plant down to the ground, within either to the ground or within 6 inches of the ground. And this is when, you know, again, this is an already established plant. You're not doing this with a, you know, a brand new plant. And typically, especially if they're, you know, woodier plant, you're not doing this every year. You know what I mean? This is something to rejuvenate and reinvigorate older plants. You know, you have an old plant that's just like, you know, 7 to 10 years old, and it's just looking a little bit ragged and maybe needs a little bit more new growth, or maybe you want to change, you want a bunch of new growth because you want the structure to be a little bit different. So this is, again, to reinvigorate older plants to produce a lot of new upright shoots. And it's kind of mimicking the effect of like a fire or a landslide on a plant. So like, it's a big traumatic thing, but the plant responds with that water spout effect. So in this case, we're actually kind of creating that water spout effect by cutting you know, totally mature plant down to the ground. And this is just some image I ripped off the internet. So there's no, I'm sure there's some liability thing there. But anyway, essentially just want to show what it looks like. It's like, you know, you have a full growth tree and you're just literally cutting it down to the stubs. And then it starts to have a bunch of new growth shoots. And then over time, it'll kind of refill. And these pictures show that. This picture here shows that really easily, or shows that nicely, which is these plants. It's a salvia and a baccharis in the front foreground. They were coppiced 4 months prior to this photo. And then, so that was in November, and then the photo was taken in March. And essentially you can see, like, it was cut all the way down to the ground like this, and they already sprung back like this. And again, you can't do this every year because eventually you weaken the plant. You know, this is something, again, it's like a landslide or a fire. The plant shouldn't be experiencing this all the time. Some options for coppicing we have here are baccharis, some buckwheats, cerces like Western redbud, Matalia poppy, definitely. Actually, Matalia poppy you can actually coppice basically almost every year. That one you can cut back down to the ground, but it's not really like a woody. I mean, it's kind of woody, it's kind of in between. That's why we can kind of do coppicing regularly on that guy. Manzanitas, some salvias. These are all kind of examples of even like a Spiralaceae ambigua, the apricot mallow or the desert mallow. That one too, basically after its seeds have dropped, you can cut that back down to the ground and it resprouts. It's kind of one that you can coppice kind of basically regularly. See, that's the thing, is like there's no rule, like specific rule. And if there is, there's always an exception. So like I've said before, everything in this class is kind of like, it depends, you know, there's not a solid answer for every situation. Okay, then there's shearing or hedging, also called hedging. And it's just basically pruning into a formal hedge, just pruning something into the hedge shape. And again, or you guys know what a hedge is. It's basically like, you know, a physical or visual barrier. And ideally you want the hedge to be wider at the bottom than the top, so that light gets to all parts of it. This isn't the best example, even though it seems like it actually opens up at the end, but I think here it is wider at the bottom than the top, but more like, you know, a shape like this, so that light is reaching the lower half. If it gets too top heavy, almost like this one, starting to get kind of top heavy. If it gets more top heavy, it's going to start shading below, and this will start to become a dead zone because it's not photosynthesizing because there's no light. So you want to make sure, like in this case, I would, it's got some flowers on here, this Nevins Barberry. But, after a while, once it gets top heavy, you got to do your hedging again, or your shearing. And typically with hedging and shearing, you are kind of doing it 2 to 3 times a year because that's what this look requires. So yeah, make sure that you at least kind of try to get the base wider than the top, even if it's just minimally. And definitely use sharp shears. This like really doesn't work as well if you have dull shears. And then yeah, trying to avoid creating the dead zone I was talking about, especially with the shade. Yeah, some examples here. Oh yeah, so this is a great, this isn't necessarily being sheared, but it's a good zoom up of what's happening, which is when you're shearing, you're essentially making hundreds of little reduction cuts. So like we were saying with that Prunus ilicifolia, you just reduce it, you're just cutting a portion of the whole limb of the plant. The same with shearing, but you're doing that over with shears over the course or over the whole plant. And so you're just doing a bunch of little ones. And when you do that, you can see like when you cut something, like I said, it encourages the growth below, all the growing nodes below start to sprout. So when these green up, each of these little growing nodes that you see sprouting even there, that's going to just be a bunch of new green growth, and that is going to be your dense hedge. So that's kind of what's happening with a hedging cut, or with a hedging cut. So yeah, I just wanted to show that's what the bud response. This would be the same bud response. This lemonade berry, this response here would be like the same response with that Prunus ilicifolia. But in the Prunus ilicifolia case, there was a lateral there. So the lateral will absorb that regrowth and be reinvigorated. But in this case, there's a little bud that can form because there's no lateral, and that's a growing leaf tip there. So yeah, so here's just an example of kind of what you're doing when you're hedging with a lemonade berry. Here's an example of a 75-year-old lemonade berry at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. So you can see it looks like a pretty typical hedge. You can do that conventional gardening with native plants if you want. This is like Raphiolepis, like Indian hawthorn. If somebody's like, I don't want natives, I just want that typical look, you can totally achieve it. And then on the right is the Eriogonum fasciculatum, the Dana Point, which someone had a photo just like this in the plant ID class that they had an example of. But this is also kind of an unintentionally hedged fasciculatum that is now, Eriogonum fasciculatum that is now kind of a hedged plant. And you can see it's definitely possible. And essentially, this is LA Byproducts. It's near Theodore Payne Foundation. I guess this is a former landfill site that's now kind of a mixed use site. And these folks have been going to Theodore Payne for years. And really, they just started shearing these to make space for their trucks to get through. And they kind of created this like interesting little, it reminds me of something like Disneyland or something. But anyway, it's a funny little thing. But again, this is kind of the technique. They're just shearing this over and over again. And that's the kind of response. Lastly, there's espaliering, which is basically when you're training a plant along a wall or a fence or some kind of structure. And, this is usually to create some kind of focal point or maybe get the plant to fit in some narrow space, along a wall or a side yard. And espaliering is very pruning and training heavy. So it requires quite a bit of this. So it has to be plants that are okay with that amount of kind of pruning and training. And not all of them will adapt to that. But some examples are the Fremontodendron, which is this flannel bush here. Also Ceanothus or Western redbud is a good one. And manzanita, some of those structural ones, they kind of have that form so you can train them. And also like your native grapes. Table grapes are good for it, and so are our native grapes. They're great for training on things. Okay, so those are, I'm gonna do a few more and then we'll do a break because there's seasons to prune, I think is kind of short, I think. Am I pushing my luck? I think I'm talking sort of slow. Let's do a break, actually. Let's do 6:05. I'm sorry. Let's do 6:05 and we'll come back and I will talk about the different seasons to prune. So break.
Thanks for the break, Claire. Everyone, please check your private messages, your direct messages to see if I asked you for your complete address. I think about half of you are going to be here Saturday, so you're good. And the other half that don't plan to be here Saturday, I'll need your mailing address. Thank you. There is one spot for the morning class and one spot for the later morning class. If anyone is still wanting to get in.
Do you know who's teaching it?
Eric.
Nice.
I think Eric.
Cool.
Milton, I see your message saying that you want to switch. I got one message right before yours and I'm switching her now. So sorry. The morning class is officially 100% full now. And so, but there's still room in the at the 10 o'clock one. 10:30, right? 10:30? 10:30 to 12, yeah. Gustavo, I see your message. I don't know if you're going to pick your certificate up in person after Saturday, or if you want me to have it here at the foundation, because I don't have an address for you at all. Usually the LADWP crew, Louis comes by and picks it up. And Connie, I see your message. Yes, that was you. I got your message right before I got Milton's. Give me about 10 minutes to send you the confirmation.
We're at 6:05. Okay, so talking about seasons to prune. Pruning is seasonal, but it very much depends on the plant, and the growing season. But so these are very general, the different things we're going to go into, because you got to remember that some plants grow their vegetative growth and then the flower, so they do their green growth and then their flower shows up. Whereas others maybe flower first and then do their vegetative growth, like a manzanita. So not all of them are the same. So kind of knowing how the plant grows, like its growing habit, and also, knowing how the plant's growing habit is going to inform when you prune things. And again, the season will be affected by your objective. So if it's like, oh, I'm pruning for this reason or pruning for that reason, might change the season that you prune. Is there anything else I was going to say about that? Yeah. Okay. So with ground covers, we'll just start with this kind of general category. With all pruning, again, it's just going to depend on the species. But generally speaking, after they've flowered or right before their vegetative growth. So it depends on the plant. If it's just flowered, then maybe you can do it in that case, or right before it starts to put out new vegetative growth. But if you're doing something like with ground covers, typically you're doing a lot of edging, if the plant is along the edge. In that case, you can clean up the paths whenever. And that kind of makes sense because when we're talking about the other pruning, maybe it's like you're doing a coppicing or something like that. You're gonna want to do that to the whole plant, whereas edging is usually just the edge of the plant. So it's not going to affect the rest of the plant so much. So you can kind of do it at any time of year and you're not going to like lose the flowers or potentially stunt the growth in some way, because it's really just kind of a cleanup move. So ground covers typically all year long if you are just doing the edging portion. Conifers, you can kind of do it any time of year, but if you're shaping, which would be like doing a big pruning cut to control for size or something, typically you want to do that after the needles harden off. And you can tell if the needles have hardened off because basically, they have like a little kind of sheath that the needles are in. And when it's hardened off, when you pull out the needle, the whole kind of package with the sheath comes together and it's hardened off. Like the pines, there's like 2 or 3 per sheath. If you try to pull out the pine needle before it's hardened off, it just comes out singularly and there's no sheath attached. So if you're doing like these bigger kind of more or a shaping kind of cut, you would kind of wait until the needles have actually hardened off. And just something with conifers is that they really need unobstructed space around them and no shade. They don't want to be touched by any other plants or people or rubbing on things. And they also don't want shade because typically they start to have dieback. So if they're rubbing with another plant, they just have dieback. Or if it's like along an area where they're being touched a lot, like a gate keeps opening on it, the dieback will occur. So just make sure you're leaving plenty of unobstructed space around them, or at least placing them appropriately so that they have that. I'm trying to think if there is. Oh yeah, with conifers, you typically don't want to cut into that older wood. The older wood is typically not going to resprout. So when we're saying shaping, you're talking about the newer tips and things like that, the newer branches and stems, not like lopping off the top of the plant or something like that. Yeah. Okay, semi-evergreen species. These are species that are green in some circumstance, or they're green. They're evergreen in most circumstances or some circumstances, and with certain conditions, they go dormant. So that's why we say semi-evergreen. Sometimes they can be both essentially. And these categories are, again, very general, and some plants can fit into multiple. But with our semi-evergreen species, you typically want to prune during their period of slowest growth or no growth. And again, this is going to vary by the species, but typically it's right before it starts to rain, in most cases. So again, you just want to do it when it's dormant or the slowest period of growth. Some examples would be Matalia poppy, shrub, monkey flowers, irises, sages, artemisia, because artemisia can kind of green all year long, but kind of has a drier part of the season. So when it's not growing is when you would do any kind of pruning to it. So on the example, this photo here is a seep monkey flower. This is actually has like annual and perennial forms, but as the common name suggests, it's found along seeps. So it's very much a water lover, and it actually is a good pond plant. And this one, you can deadhead these for more flowers. Actually, all the monkey flowers you can deadhead, and when you are deadheading them, they actually, monkey flowers, the flowers from below mature first. So it kind of flowers upward. And so you actually kind of pull out if you're deadheading, you are removing each spent flower as it moves up the stem. And, or you can leave it if you're trying to, like, if you want it to go to seed for whatever reason, maybe you're collecting seed. And in that case, you can cut out the whole flower stump, sorry. You can cut out the whole flower stem below the last spent flower, but still above whatever green growth there is. You don't want to cut back into like the drier, woodier kind of deadish growth area. So you want to make sure you're cutting into the kind of newer growth zone area. But anyway, back to the seep monkey flower. In this case, you could deadhead for the flowers like you would any monkey flower, but it also spreads pretty aggressively in these seep areas. You can see on the top right photo, it's this yellow one. It could easily just fill in this whole space. And if it's starting to kind of move in aggressively, you might need to cut it back if it's starting to crowd other plants. And again, that would be during its period of slowest or no growth. And that might be you trying to keep it from sprawling. And also, even with like a normal monkey flower, or normal, I guess a shrubby monkey flower, they can get pretty sprawly. So if you want to keep it from being sprawly, you can do tip pinching to reinforce its kind of bushy nature. But also you can do that pruning I was saying, where you cut back the flowering stem, the spent whole flowering stem, and make sure you leave some green growth so that it can kind of have that bush form again, instead of if you just let it go and never prune it. Sometimes they get pretty like leggy and sprawly. Okay, and then lastly, or no, not lastly, this category is just kind of the big one, which includes evergreens, herbaceous perennials, and shrubs. So it's a very big category of plants, clearly. And again, the general rule is you would shape them. So do your pruning to shape for after they flowered, and do any rejuvenating cuts like coppicing or really hard reduction cuts in fall. So shaping after flowering or rejuvenating in the fall. And that goes for all these plants here. Essentially, and this makes sense, but there are exceptions. So not all of them do you want to shape after flowering and rejuvenate in fall. An example would be this one on the right, which is both of these on the right. So Toyon here is an evergreen, so it falls into this category. But the rule of shaping after flowering and rejuvenating after fall, it flowers sometime in summer, and then after the flowers, these fruit develop. And any of you guys who have seen them with fruit on it, it usually comes sometime around winter time, like Christmas berry. So we are typically waiting for that fruit, so it flowers and then forms fruit. So if I were to shape this Toyon after it flowered, I'd be removing all the flowers that we are anticipating turning into fruit. And so then or even if I was rejuvenating in fall, they still haven't fruited usually by that point. They still haven't, they don't have those bright red fruits. So that would be an exception. And typically the exceptions are those that are grown for their showy fruit or their showy seeds, or, they're there to attract wildlife. So if that's the point of the plant, then you maybe don't want to follow this rule. And this other picture, which isn't very good, is Cercocarpus betuloides, which is the mountain mahogany. And if you guys remember or check your flashcards, it flowers, and it's kind of a whatever flower, but it has these very cool, wispy, ghostly looking seed heads that are kind of feathery. And those are kind of the showy part of the plant, not the flower. So if I were to shape it after flowering, I would remove all the potential for that seed head. So again, you want to make sure you're not just employing this rule all the time. Like, always ask yourself, why am I doing this cut? Am I doing this to encourage wildlife? Or am I doing this just to keep it clean? What am I doing this for? So yeah, this category, there's so many things that fall into this category. You can see there's coffeeberry, toyon, coyote bush, manzanita, chamise, mountain mahogany, laurel sumac, lemonade berry, jojoba, sugar bush. There, some buckwheats even, a lot lot of options in this one. So yeah, again, these are the exceptions kind of to the rule there. Here's an example of 2 different salvia or Cleveland sages that have been pruned, or one has been pruned, the one on the left of the stairs, and the one on the right has not been pruned. And the one on the left was headed back. So a bunch of reduction cuts, probably cut it back like 30 to 50%, so significantly to rejuvenate it. And you can see the one on the left that has had these heading cuts has a lot of new solid regrowth. And the one on the right does not have a lot of solid new regrowth, but and it was just, left as it was, but that's not a bad thing. It still looks fine if that's what you want. It really depends on, again, what kind of client do you have? Like if I were to say like, I'm the client and I was like, I really want there to be a lot of wildlife habitat and there to be plenty of space for birds and wildlife to live in and scrap around and eat seeds. Which one would I prefer? Does anyone want to answer that? I guess that was kind of rhetorical, but you guys can answer it. No one wants to answer it. So which if I were like someone who which of these Salvia clevelandii would be better for kind of wildlife habitat and birds and things like that? Any ideas? Oh, I didn't realize people are probably answering in the chat. I should check it out. Yeah, the right side, the untouched one. Thank you. Okay, got it. Great. So we're just in a silent mood, but we're in a talkie on the chat mood. Oh, there's like a sun spot on me, guys. This is cool. Anyway, so yeah, like it's
Claire,
just about...
I have one comment on that, but like what they could do is maybe mulch the seed heads on the one on the left. So see how you have a hillside here and there's not much mulch there. They could just take that, kind of break it up and drop it on the ground, and the birds will play around in that stuff probably.
Absolutely. So yeah, Jason has a really good kind of solution that you could use if you wanted the regrowth, but you also want to keep the kind of wildlife habitat and all the goody little nest material, is just when you headed it all back to leave all that material here on the soil so that it looks a little bit more like this, a little bit more mulchy. So yeah, definitely, absolutely. That's a
I like that cleaner look. Then you can get both, that's
exactly.
I like that clean look.
For sure. And maybe you have a client who's like, no, this is a barrier. I really don't like looking at my neighbors. And so they don't want it to be cut back. It really always goes back to your objective. What's the goal here? So is it wildlife? Is it a physical barrier? All the things. So yeah, that's a great solution, Jason, for that case scenario. Lastly, we have this group of kind of flowering perennials, which is kind of, this is basically perennials that have a pretty long blooming season. They kind of continue to flower all year long. And generally with these, if you are going to be pruning them, you kind of, because they have a long flowering season, or they kind of keep flowering almost all year. If you were to wait for them to stop flowering, you'll never prune it because there's not really a time they're not flowering. And in that case, you want to just do it after their first flush of flowers, kind of that big main push, and then you can prune at that point. And it's going to change based off location and species, but that's kind of a good rule for those where you're like, well, it's not really stopping flowering. What do I do then? Bush poppy, the island snapdragon is an example. Penstemons, California fuchsia is an interesting one. If you have a California fuchsia, maybe one of the taller ones, or maybe you are pruning it early in the season, like after its early in its season of flowering, maybe you're pruning it because you want to kind of have a bushier shape, then yeah, do it after the first flush of flowers. But typically what we're doing is kind of the maintenance, like the annual maintenance on a California fuchsia, the epilobium, is after its first year, after it's established, which is typically about a year for the epilobiums. You can coppice it, like I was saying in that, or mow it, like we were saying in the slide. And you do that after it's flowered, because in that case, it has a pretty long window of flowering, but it does usually end. It starts like around New Year's. It's pretty brown, and it looks pretty brown. There's not new flowers on it. And in that case, you cut it all the way back down to the ground, like within an inch of its little life, and you'll see like little new green growth happening there. And in spring, it'll kind of flush up again. So again, it's like, maybe you do it after the first flush of flowers if you're trying to kind of you prune it for some reason that's not the kind of annual coppicing it to kind of regenerate growth. You know, if you're trying to get it a little more bushy or encourage that denser branch habit. Okay, what not to do. This is helpful. You don't want to make a bunch of heading cuts because that's going to weaken the plant. So you're not, the point isn't like, I'm going to make heading cuts all over the plant. A lot of times people are doing that to control for size and they just keep doing heading cuts all over. That's not ideal. Usually you want to be doing a heading cut because you're like, oh, I just want to fix this issue over here, or I'm trying to encourage a shape or a formation. But if you have to do that every year and to control for size, it's probably better to just replace that variety with something smaller. Like you probably put the wrong place, or wrong plant, wrong place. So, and also a bad thing or not to do would be pruning right before it flowers, because, and this is what's happened with the ceanothus, because if you prune right prior to their flowering season, then you missed the flowering. And that's kind of the cool, showy part of our natives. And also obviously kind of the point for the wildlife, you know, you just cut out all the food for those pollinators. And so you can see that's what's happened here, because you can see the ceanothus is flowering on the edge here where it wasn't kind of excessively headed back, or it looks like it's just been sheared essentially. And so you can see we're missing out on the flowers. We only get this few on the edge because this just keeps getting cut back at the wrong time of year right before it flowers. So don't do that. This one is likely too big for the spot if they're needing to do these kind of cuts to keep it in line. And then it's likely overwatered. You can't really see from the photo, but this is actually very wet here. It's kind of darker than this. It's very moist. And then I spoke with Tim and he said, there's a lot of weeds around here that you can't see. And another clue, so it's wet, a lot of weeds. You can see here, there's some dieback happening, you know, around the bush. And that could be from the pruning, but it also could just be dieback from overwatering. So, I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's just kind of like, you know, a clue. These are the kind of when you're looking at it, like the things that you don't want to do. Again, here's an example of a Cleveland sage. Again, this is probably like someone has sheared or hedged this to control for size. And maybe it would have been better just to have one or space these more appropriately. And instead, there's just like a bunch of cuts here to like basically control it, but it almost looks like this weird cylindrical, you know, strange art piece. You know what I mean? So if that's what you're going for, great, but it doesn't look the best. You know what I mean? And also you can see like that's affecting the flowering. You know, it's not going to flower on these edges because it keeps getting pruned there, and it's just going to be these tips. So not that great. And also, again, just pick an appropriate sized plant for this. You know, maybe a smaller one to go in this spot. Oh, I'm not going to do this exercise because I want to have time, but I'm going to do a poll. I can do a quick poll as a breather. It's just kind of review. Okay, so yes, here's the poll. You guys should be able to see it. Again, a client has expressed the importance of their native garden providing habitat and food for birds and wildlife. Their large 7-year-old toyon has a few unruly branches, and it is late summer, and there are a bunch of spent flowers all over it. When do you think is the best time to prune it? And is it immediately, which would be this summertime? Do you wait a couple months until fall? Or do you wait until late spring or early spring? I'm just seeing you guys are getting all these answers in. Keep it going. Remember to ask yourself, like, what is the goal? What's this plant? What's the goal here? You know what I mean? Who's my client? What do they want? And what plant am I dealing with? Okay, 21 out of 27. Let's get it up to like 90%, guys. 23. Okay, I don't think you guys can see the results, right? Only I can? Is that how it works? I'll share the results. Okay, I have 88%. What are you stragglers doing? Okay, it's 24 out of 27. That's pretty good. There could be like 3 people that are at the bathroom or something like that. So I'm going to end the poll and I will share the results. So you can see we got like 13% who said immediately in summer. We got 25% who say B, wait a couple months. And then the majority says C, wait until late winter or early spring. does anyone want to share kind of their rationale for what they picked? You know, even if it, you know, I don't want to give the right answer or anything right now. I could see you making an argument for any of them, but does anyone want to share?
Brittany put it in the chat. The berries come in the winter, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Brittany says, oh, yeah, the berries, duh. So, yeah, I mean, again, this is a client and they've expressed like, hey, really important native garden providing habitat, food for birds. So, like, their priorities matter most because it is a client. And there are some unruly branches, but like, yeah, they've said that native birds are important. And so I'm thinking, okay, we want to make sure we keep these berries on there. And yeah, so late summer, this is kind of the example of the rule of shaping after flowering or rejuvenating fall. This is where it doesn't hold up, that rule. And so yeah, if we do it in summer, again, they flower in summer. So if we were to cut this back in summer, and I mean, it goes flower and then fruit, remember? So if something's flowering and then I chop it off and prune it, that fruit doesn't have time to develop. So if I'm cutting it back in summer or even in fall, since we know that toyons fruit and get fully developed sometime in Christmas, so like winter, that means if I prune it sometime in summer or fall, I'm gonna chop off my berries and not get to have the berries that year. And yeah, and then Brenda mentioned nesting season will be over by August. And then on the plus side, because this client has, thank you, Brenda, this client has said, you know, like wildlife's important. So it's not just about berries. It's also like, I don't want to disturb the nesting season of my, the potential habitat of this space. So August, you know, we want to wait until then. So another great point. Dude, I'm going to add that to my note card, Brenda, because that's like something I forgot to add. So yeah, that's a little poll. Let's see, let's move on. Stop sharing poll. Get out of my face. Okay, now tools. And okay, so tools, this should be pretty quick, which is essentially you want to keep so always keep your tools sharp. It's really important with sharp. It's not just safer, but it's a cleaner cut when it's sharper. And a cleaner cut means the wound will callus and heal over more quickly. When it's a duller kind of knife, or not knife, sorry, a duller shears or hand pruners, it's actually kind of crushing the cells around more, not more, but it's cutting and crushing at the same time. So when you crush, it makes it slower to heal because you're damaging more cells because you're also crushing the nearby ones. So definitely want to have them sharp for clean cuts. And it should go without saying, but use tools safely, no duh. And then as much as you can, try to use hand tools because it really allows you to be in there and see what's going on and get that like kind of more monitoring of the plant. So you pick up on pests, you pick up and see whatever's going on in the garden more often. Because when you're moving through with motorized stuff or gas powered stuff, you kind of move through it pretty quickly and you might not notice like that little brewing whitefly problem or whatever. So it just kind of makes more, if you can, not in all situations, doesn't always work. And it also kind of protects your hearing and makes it's more appropriate for wildlife habitat. You know, you don't go to the wildlife habitats and it's just like, you know, air horns blaring, because it's not just for our hearing, it's for all the kind of habitat dwellers. Hygiene, super important. A lot of, as we talked about in the last class, there's a lot of different fungal, viral, and bacterial diseases that can be passed and that are contagious amongst plants. And we can spread them with our dirty tools. So you want to be sure that you're not adding to that and you're actually cleaning your tools between sites and especially between cuts when dealing with diseased material. You can do that with bleach. You can do that, like, you know, everybody should know this by now after a pandemic of like this long. You know, it's basically like a 10-to-1, 9-to-1 kind of disinfectant solution, something that disinfects them. But bleach will kind of oxidize and ruin your tools over time. So you can use Lysol, rubbing alcohol. Even I know folks that use torches. You know, you can torch your thing to basically sterilize it before you do cuts. Make sure it's not like sopping with bleach. Of course, wipe it off after using any kind of disinfecting solution. Okay, there's like 100, not 100, but there's a ton of slides I'm going to kind of move through on tools. But I'm just going to kind of focus on the main ones for pruning and any of my favorites. But bypass pruners, that's, you know, your hand shears. I just want to, this is for any branches that are like, you know, 1/4 of an inch or less in diameter. And just one note, there's bypass pruners like this. They're kind of work like scissors. You know, the blade is kind of going by another kind of sharper edge. And then there's anvil pruners, which typically it's like the blade, it's just one blade and it kind of just stops on a kind of stopper. And you want to have bypass pruners with pruning because anvil pruners are more likely to crush it. Again, it's more like a knife on a cutting board, an anvil pruner, whereas bypass pruner is more like scissors. So it's a cleaner cut with bypass pruners. The anvil pruners make more sense for like dry, woody, dead material that you might be removing. Hedging shears, they look like this. You guys probably all know them. Make sure they're sharp. This is for hedging. Loppers are usually for branches that are like, you know, up to like 3/4 of an inch. So a bit bigger than your bypass pruners, but not so big. This handsaw looks like a tiny little butter knife, but it's actually bigger. But anyway, a handsaw usually has this curved blade. Usually you see the wooden handled ones. And these are for, you know, branches that are larger than that, you know, the larger branches that your loppers can't handle. So you want a handsaw for anything like that. Okay, this is where we get into too many slides, but I do have long arm pruners, obviously. So those are kind of like telescopic pruners. Just, you know, be careful with like power lines. That's a no-brainer, but that's a safety thing. There's also pole saws and pole pruners. These, again, the telescopic ones here. Machetes, I'm going to move through these. Oh, wait, actually, the collinear hoe is the middle one. And this is the hoe I was talking about with the weeding class. These are nice because they shallowly kind of can, what's it called? Cultivate soil to remove like little new fresh weeds. They don't really work with like bigger, thicker weeds. Rakes, I kind of think you guys should know these things, but bow rakes, landscape rakes, you probably need them for spreading mulch. Don't use leaf rakes for spreading mulch. They don't really work. I really recommend the shovel on the right, the trenching shovel for planting. You get like a nice deep hole. They're helpful for planting, like for 1 gallons. I'm just gonna move through these guys. Oh, but horis are great. I feel like I get these for people for Christmas, like new gardeners, this horis for Christmas all the time. They're great, like all around little garden tool for digging up stuff, planting things, you know, just feeling like Rambo, you know, just feeling like a badass in the garden. They're great. Anything else? Irrigation adjustment things, soil probes. Not really going to go into these. Oh, but the dram watering nozzle. This is kind of like the go-to. Well, the nozzle is a little thing at the end and the wand is the whole long thing. The dram watering nozzle is like the go-to watering nozzle for like all native plant nurseries. So if you want to like be a pro like them, it's got like a really nice, even, gentle showering that it does. So if you want to like upgrade or, you know, good Christmas present for your gardener friend, dram watering nozzle is a good one. Okay, so putting it all together, let's see how much time I got. Well, I got some time. Great. So I wanted to, we have some examples, but I also want to kind of use the resources that we have. So we'll go through the examples, but I just want to remind you, if you don't have your student handbook, or grab it, because it might be helpful to we're going to review the maintenance kind of data sheet together after I go through this. So grab that. But essentially, we're going to talk a little bit about like manzanita, sage, ceanothus. Those are kind of the standards. Or those are, I mean, you'll find at least one of these in every native garden, probably, you know. And so typically with manzanitas, so the way it's kind of set up is like, okay, again, what's the reason you're pruning? It could be for aesthetic reasons. And it could be to like, you know, you're shaping it, or it could be like you're trying to reveal the branches, you know, if you have one of those structural kind of ones. And so the season that you would want to prune, if you're shaping it, would be early spring. And this is really simplified, kind of, it just says before the new flower buds form. So just to kind of give a little bit more on this is, so manzanitas, that iconic kind of like twisted form that manzanitas have, is due to their flowers, essentially, the way they grow. So essentially the chronology of a manzanita is they kind of, right when it starts to cool down, they basically start flowering, and they flower, and then they start having a little bit of vegetative growth, and then that's like basically that vegetative growth but when I say vegetative growth, I mean like leaves and stems, like leaf growth. So they flower immediately on bare wood, essentially. I mean, well, they're evergreen, so it's not bare wood, but it's like not new, fresh green leaves. It's like the leaves that have been there. So they flower first thing when it cools, and they start to do their new growth after they flowered, or after, sorry, flower, fruit, and then you get the fresh green growth. And then that growth of the stem terminates with the nascent flower buds. And so that's the flower buds for next year. And so basically it just stops growing the vegetative growth, and these little like flower buds end the growth of that season. And then summer hits and they're just kind of dormant. You know, they're not really doing any more extra growth. So when they terminate that stem's growth by kind of producing the nascent flower bud, the next season, that nascent flower bud's going to pop open, fruit, and then it's going to grow in a different direction. Because so that's why the manzanitas aren't growing like the stem doesn't grow in the same line forever, because essentially it just kind of keeps twisting every time you have a new nascent bud that stops that growth, and then the vegetative growth for the next season starts on a different path. I'm sorry if that was I don't feel like I explained that very well, but essentially, knowing that, when you prune, you want to make sure that you're pruning after they've flowered, but during or before those nascent buds form. So again, they flower and then set fruit, and then they're starting to have this vegetative growth. That window before they terminate their growth is when you want to prune, if you're pruning for shape and trying to, like, you know, maybe tip pinch or increase the density of the plant, like, you know, you want to get in that window where it's doing the vegetative growth before the nascent buds form and terminate the growth. Because if I were to prune it afterwards, like sometime in summer, I'm going to prune off the nascent buds for next year. So then the plant will have no flowers next year. You know, of course, it'll probably grow the following year, but you'll just have terminated the flowers for the following year. So you want to make sure you get into that window, which is usually early spring, because they flower sometime, like basically in winter, set fruit, and then early spring, they're still having that vegetative growth. So you want to kind of hop on that moment when the new growth is still tender and they haven't formed their little nascent buds. What else do I want to say about that? Yeah, so basically, and then so if I wanted to do some like removing dead wood or something like that, because a lot of times you'll see a lot of little dead twigs all along the manzanita, and maybe you want to remove those so that you can kind of showcase the structure, structure of the tree. And in that case, I don't really care. There's no flowers. That's a dead stick. I don't care about making sure to get into that window. So I would probably just cut those in the middle of summer or late summer, or whatever, when it's driest and hottest, to avoid any time of year when fungal disease would spread. So that special consideration is prune it when it's hot and dry. Even goes for if you're pruning in springtime, try to pick a hot, dry day. Obviously, we don't have, we have pretty warm weather and pretty dry weather many times in spring. And especially if I'm doing just removing dead wood from the tree, I don't even have to wait for spring. I could do it in the middle of summer, and definitely want to do it when it's hot and dry. So again, thinking about the plant and why am I cutting it? What am I cutting? For what reason? How does this plant grow? Let's see if there's anything I want to, okay, so I'm going to now go to the handbook. If you guys go to page, what page is it? Okay, well, it starts on page 97, but you can just go straight to page 113. Essentially, it's called the California Native Plant Maintenance Data Sheet. This was put together by Theodore Payne. This is like the whole course. This is worth the whole course here. This is like a great archive of all the native plants. They're organized by kind of plant type, their genus, their common name, and then they have like a lot of information that's everything we've covered in this course kind of for each plant or each species, more or less. So super, super, super helpful. I really wanted to kind of talk about it in class so that you guys just know this exists, because it's really great resource. So if we go to page 113, okay, wait, I guess I should. So this is like basically a big Excel sheet in paper form or in even in digital form. So 4 consecutive pages refers to each row. So you have 4 pages per row. So for example, 113, 114, 115, 116 is all the same row going across like an Excel sheet. So if I start with 113, you can see the second entry there is Arctostaphylos, which is the manzanita, which we were just talking about. And it has a little description box, which is awesome. And I'm just going to read it to you, as annoying as that is, because it basically says what I just said, but more concisely and better, which is essentially the description tells you about the plant, maybe any pruning things, any kind of interesting notes about it that you should know, which is thin branches to create an open look or tip frequently in years 1 through 5 for a dense hedge. So again, and you're going to tip pinch in that time period, kind of in early spring. And then manzanitas periodically get galls in the summer. So they usually fall off by themselves by fall. So if you see galls on a manzanita, don't worry about it. By summer, manzanitas have usually already set buds for next year's winter flowers. So time your pruning for spring, after they flowered and set berries, but before they set next year's buds. So yeah, they basically said what I said in like 3 minutes in just 2 sentences. But small dead twigs are common and should be removed in early summer to improve appearance. And then it says disinfect shears between cuts if pruning off dead or diseased wood. So all of this in a nutshell is just like right here. If you don't, remember what was said in the lecture, you always have this great resource. Oh, I see Nick said this. I snap old wood, it breaks clean. That's exactly what it says here. So small dead twigs you can just break off. And then I just wanted to highlight the rest of the row, what it includes, which is if you continue along that same row, you'll see there's a column for pruning season. So it tells you the typical pruning season. Of course, depends what method you're using, or yes, what type of and why you're pruning. And then you'll see that it has 3 columns for evergreen, summer dormant, and winter dormant. So it'll tell you if the plant's evergreen or any of the following. So it's clicked, of course, for evergreen. If you go to page 114, continuing with the columns, you have a column for works well with LADWP irrigation regulations, which is awesome. Essentially, it's like, can this plant deal with the the watering regulations of the 3 days a week that are on and off and for 8 minutes or whatever. So it's not clicked for manzanita, probably because manzanitas want their nice deep watering infrequently, and they're a bit trickier than wanting. They really don't. Well, no, I'm not going to say that. Either way, they're a bit trickier with irrigation. Then the next column, which I think is awesome, even though I've said that a million times, the preferred plant for swales. So this is going to tell you, does this plant work well in rain gardens? If I'm installing a rain garden or a swale or something like that, that's part of the turf replacement program, is this plant good for that? And here it says no, or it's not clicked. Then it says your preferred mulch type. So which mulch is the best for this plant? And usually it'll tell you either or. And then this is a really good one, the replacement value. So this is kind of like the interval in years that either something could be like rejuvenated or replaced. Sorry, replaced or coppiced. So either you're rejuvenating it or you're replacing it completely. So it can be the lifespan of the plant, or it could also just be like, hey, this is when it's going to get kind of like a little bit, I guess, like worn for time. And if you want to rejuvenate it, you can. So you can see the window for Arctostaphylos is like 20 to 30 years. And that makes sense. It's a long-lived plant. Then the following columns are like whether or not it's difficult to establish, the flowering season, summer water, if it's low, medium, high. And then, okay, the like important part to this class is you then have all the columns of common pruning techniques used with this plant. So again, you might use other pruning techniques, but these are the ones that are typically used for it in the most common settings. So you can see Arctostaphylos has early tip pinching, which was just mentioned for that, if you're trying to make a denser kind of denser vegetation. And then it also says thinning, which makes sense if you're snapping off that dry wood. You then it says deadheading. No, that's not really common with it. If you go to the next page, 115, it checks marks hedging, coppicing, raising, and then there's mowing as an option. And then you see after that, it's basically like all the common pests that would potentially affect this plant. So this is just a really great resource. I wanted to make sure that you guys saw. I think, I wanted to mention, it says here, okay, so here in this guide, they use the term directional or formal pruning. This is going to be for heading back or reduction cuts. These are kind of like synonyms. And then the raising is usually when you are shortening the lower branches sort of regularly to kind of suppress the growth of the lower branches so it doesn't get like top heavy or something like that. That would be raising. But anyway, so that's a very cool resource that you should make sure to pay attention to. I will just kind of keep moving through my, okay, I still have a little bit of time when I don't have many more slides. So just quickly, I'll kind of, this is ceanothus, which again, you know, kind of the same format with ceanothus, which is, you know, reason to prune, could be aesthetic, you're shaping it, hedging it, edging it, depends on, you know, what you're doing. Typically with ceanothus, you do it after it flowers. And, you know, ceanothus doesn't, they have their green growth and their flowering. And wait, is there something I wanted to majorly point out here? I feel like there was. Well, either way, if you're doing the tip pinching, you're going to be tip pinching. You could also kind of consider deadheading. It very much depends on, a lot of times these terms are used interchangeably, but you tip pinch to remove the old flower clusters. And that's that. In this case, it's not going to affect the nascent buds of next year. That's a manzanita thing. So you can actually tip pinch to remove the flower clusters, and you can shear it if you're doing hedging. Yeah, and then their only special consideration is the not trying to avoid cutting larger branches or larger stems, because the larger the wound, the more likely it is to get infected. And again, if I just go to this resource guide and I look at what's said on ceanothus, it has some interesting tips that are just like leaf drop is typical with the onset of firsthand summer heat waves. So if there's the first heat wave and you see a bunch of leaf drop, you can tell your client that's really typical with ceanothus. And it says, don't add extra water to combat this natural occurrence. So you see leaf drop, don't mean you gotta keep watering it. And then it says, if anything, refrain from overwatering this chaparral shrub in summer. So again, don't want to overwater it. Ceanothus, we know, are very susceptible to being overwatered in summer. They're kind of picky about summer water. And then it says, prune it in spring after blooms to control size and to increase lateral branching for a denser look, if desired. So again, I don't know if I made this clear, but like, you don't have to prune plants. It's just, it really depends on what your goal is. You know, if something like some evergreens, it's like, they really don't need it. If it looks good and it looks healthy and there's no complaints, then it's not necessary. Okay, and then lastly, I'll just go to, we got sage. I think this is pretty, we kind of talked about these, which is, yeah, shaping to avoid crown splitting. Rejuvenation would be to, like that example of the Cleveland sage that was cut back in fall to have the rejuvenating green growth. Tip pinching, deadheading, heading back, ground covers. I think this, and then you could look, if you want to check out salvia on your thing, on your data sheet, that would be on page 121. It's the last one. And it basically says similar, like tip pinch, prune sages early on to avoid crown splitting, same. It says they're generally low maintenance. You can deadhead in late summer, and then you can reduce their size by 1/3 annually. So that would be if you're, that I think is more for Cleveland sages. They're pretty robust. Some of our like purple, black sage, Munz's sage, you can do it too, but they kind of like lose their vigor after a while, more so than a Cleveland sage. And then also with white sages, I wouldn't do much, like do your tip pinching when it's young. I wouldn't do much pruning except for removing those big tall flower stalks at one point, you know, once they're, you know, like really long and dry and getting in the way or something. That's when you could start to remove them. But otherwise, very little need for pruning on a white sage. And I think they mentioned white sages being picky with clay soil in your maintenance data sheet. Okay, so lastly, these ones that are just always the additional kind of opportunities, which would be, you know, you could do annual tree pruning if that's your thing. Of course, the larger trees on a property, you know, well, I would say, yeah, it's like you can make a proposal to someone and be like, you know, you could say annual tree pruning, or it could just be like, you know, the annual pruning of the garden and included the larger trees in there. Again, if you're not like, if this is not your thing, you could hire a subcontractor. And but the main thing is with the larger trees is prune based off of the nesting season. That's, you know, important thing, and that's something you can kind of sell as your best management practices, you know, that you're avoiding the nesting season, especially with like, you know, like oaks and bigger trees like that. I mean, typically you're not really pruning. You don't need to do like annual pruning on an oak tree, you know what I mean? This would be like if there was damage or something. But I know something that Catherine mentioned, who has done quite a few classes on pruning with Theodore Payne, is she mentioned that There are restrictions on cutting oaks, especially coast live oak in Los Angeles. Anything that's over 8 inches in diameter, you need a permit to cut. So don't be pruning your coast live oak thinking that's okay. And usually you're doing those in their dormant season, late summer or early winter. And then,
A quick question about that. Do you mean like cut, like heading, or just kind of trimming, or just cutting?
Anytime, well, I was referring, the 8-inch diameter is for any cut. Any cutting that you're doing for anything that's over 8 inches in diameter. So if it's a reduction cut or anything, you can't do without a permit. But if you are, you're typically not really doing reduction cuts on an oak tree. Like I can't really think of a lot of situations where you're doing that. You might be doing like a thinning cut for some, branch that's died or damaged, but you don't want to really mess with you don't really want to mess with an oak tree too much with pruning. And heading cuts are very much about shaping. And I could see mostly thinning being something you do with an oak tree when it's young, maybe like to remove the understory branches, maybe a heading cut when it's young, if it's very lopsided and you want to encourage, maybe a different leader. But again, if it's much older, if it has anything like 8-inch diameter, I wouldn't be trying to do any heading cuts. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then lastly, the fire zone modification thing, which is, we kind of mentioned this. If folks are on that kind of border with the wildland urban interface, this is an important, really important zone, fire zone, and keeping it clear is super important. So you could be offering the service of doing, I'm totally forgetting fire, Brenda will know, but essentially there's like a term for that type of pruning for fire safety. What is that called? I'm like totally blanking. Anyway, around your house, there's like a certain type of pruning that I'm totally missing. And there was like 2 classes with Theodore Payne about
Clearing.
Yeah,
Clearing and maintaining that defensible space.
Defensible space. That's what it is. Yes. So you could, do kind of like offer that. And that's because essentially if you don't, and there is a fire or the local agency has to come out, they're going to just do it and clear it. They're not going to do it with beauty and health in mind. And granted, if there is a fire, they just have to, that's like not the point. But in the case of, just maintaining a clear space and defensible space, you can offer that service with pruning. Okay, this is a quick 2-minute video from LADWP. I'll just play it real quick. This is in the case, this is LADWP, so it's very general, and this is nothing to substitute the in-person class. I just wanted to put it in here because, they're partners with us on this, but also I think this is the best I can do in terms of if you don't get to go to the in-person class, these are some things and some visuals. So I'll just press play here and then we can do Q&A.
Plants that are appropriate to our climate and use less water will help your client save money. One of the most important things to remember while maintaining these beautiful, sustainable gardens is to properly prune the plants in the yard. Some people don't know that every cut makes a wound, and plants don't heal. They must seal over the wound. So you should always have a good reason for each cut. Remember, the first reason to prune or trim a plant is to keep it healthy. Here are some reasons you may want to remove a branch. When they're dead, look for branches with dead leaves or shriveled blackened buds. To check, scrape the bark to see if it's green underneath. If it's brown, you know the branch is dead. When there is disease, look for sunken areas that are oozing or discolored along branches or trunks. If they are, prune the diseased branch back to at least 6 inches below the diseased area into healthy wood if possible. When there is damage, if there are broken branches, make a clean cut to a bud on a young stem, to another branch, or remove the branch entirely. When they're deranged, this includes branches that are rubbing against each other or the trunk. You'll need to choose one to keep and prune the others out. Don't forget, never leave a stub. When this happens, the plants sprout weak branches called water sprouts, creating crowded branches, unhealthy plants, and more work for you. Here are some tips to avoid this. Remove whole branches all the way back to the bulge at the base of the branch. This prevents water sprouts and enables the plant to seal over the wound. If you must shorten a branch, prune it back to another branch that is at least 1/3 the thickness of the part being removed. On young 1-year-old branches, you can shorten them by cutting them to an outward-facing bud or back to another branch. Lastly, never prune trees or shrubs into balls or other shapes. This creates lots of stubs, lots of work, and is harmful to plants. This kind of thoughtful pruning maintenance will grow healthy, thriving plants. Thank you for maintaining sustainable gardens.
Okay,
I have a comment.
tell me. Oh, sorry. Hold on.
Plants that are appropriate.
Sorry about that, Brenda.
That those trees that were squares, they must have square roots.
Yes, a math joke.
I'm here all week, folks.
I liked it. Okay, so lastly, just homework. Again, this is a choose your own adventure. The top one is what is on your outline, and that's what you'll find if you look on your outline, just sorting your flashcards into groups with similar pruning needs. So using the different pruning types, you can kind of sort your flashcards that way and just kind of, you know, make a list. Like this one is ground cover, you can do, or sorry, ground cover, edging, mowing, and you can do that. And you can also use the handout that we just went over, the plant maintenance data sheet, to do kind of a sorting and just show me that. Personally, I don't think I would find that super helpful if I were a student. So if you want, and if the second one seems more, I don't know, of a learning opportunity for you, then there's that option, which is just assess a native plant, take a picture, and determine the best course of action and what pruning type pruning method you would use. When would you prune it? Tell me what's going on. Like, give me this condition, like it's lopsided, it's a Prunus ilicifolia. I want to prune it at this time of year for this reason, and this is my goal. You know what I mean? So if you want to do that, I think that is, I think that could be more helpful, but either or, don't do both, just either or of these homework assignments. And then anyone who has questions, we can answer those. I can talk about gophers, Jason, if anyone doesn't have questions, but I will stop my share. And yeah, we got like a couple minutes here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When there's like the first few years of the plants, is there any tips for pruning when they're being established?
Yeah, I really recommend the tip pinching method. So pinching that new growth or recently flowered growth to encourage it to get like bushier and denser and have kind of a stronger base. So definitely in the first years, I can't think of a plant that wouldn't benefit from that. So tip pinching would be my main one I would suggest to kind of encourage that branching, especially because you might notice, like say you get a sage plant from a nursery or any plant, but a lot of times you'll get like a nice, perfect little white sage plant. It's just one stem or like, you know, two. So you want to tip pinch that to encourage it to have more branches. So you don't just have like one and potentially have that crown splitting thing happen.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Professor, real quick. So I know it's not native, but for this hibiscus, does the tip pinching also work for hibiscus?
You know, when they're new growth, I have done that with hibiscus, but this one looks like it's pretty tall and has some flowers, like it has the fruit and stuff on it. But the new growth, you can do that too. This one, I mean, it's hard because you could potentially try to like coppice it, but it is pretty young. It looks like it's in a pot.
Yeah.
So it would be hard to tip pinch. Well, you would kind of increase the dense branching, but it would be at the tips of these already pretty long branches. So if you can tip pinch it back to like a growing tip, I just thought I was trying to point to it, but like it looks like there's some leaves there. You could potentially do that too. But again, tip pinching is typically on the newer growth, like that first month's growth.
Oh, first month. Yeah, this is not a year yet, but yeah.
With vegetables and even trees, like you want to kind of cut back into that first year's wood. So with something that's woodier, you want to cut back into that first year's wood because that's where there's active growing happening. And if you cut back into older wood, in a lot of cases, they don't resprout. Not in all, but if you want to ensure it, it's kind of best to do a reduction cut into living first year's growth.
Hey, Claire.
Yeah.
So for the case of the manzanitas, is there any way to prune them in a way to promote growth? Like I know they're slow growers, but yeah.
Are you talking about like dense kind of growth or like elongating growth? You know what I mean?
I guess just kind of like any growth. I planted like 2 Howard Mickmans in the fall, and I feel like they really haven't done much. And I'm curious to see if they're gonna flower this year.
This is their first year in the ground?
Yes, I planted them last fall.
I think they typically don't flower in that first year. But if they do, I would consider myself lucky and like you have been blessed by some entity. But if it was to encourage growth, and yes, they are kind of slower growers, I would definitely do it in that period, that spring period before they put the nascent buds on. So after they've flowered and fruited, and then they'll start to have new vegetative growth like stems and leaves coming, cut into that. And actually, a lot of times do a kind of harder cut. So if it's like, if it's this long, do, at least 50%. Don't just do the 25%, because when they're actively growing, their response is to like, hey, you cut me, like I'm coming back harder. But when they're not actively growing, their response is to kind of be like, they don't do anything. So if it's in that active growth period point, I would cut it back like 50% to encourage some growth. The only kind of exception there would be if you don't see any, like if you cut it back 50% and there's no leaves or buds to cut it back to. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure that there's plenty, like, 2 or 3 at least nodes for it to grow branches from, so that it actually does have that response.
So ideally of the new growth, 50% of that new growth.
Yeah, and you could even, I would say 50% as long as it has the nodes and buds to support that. But if you cut it 50% and it like only leaves 1 bud, then I would say no, don't do 50%, do less, do 25%. But just try to give it kind of a harder cut, as in don't just do or you know what I mean? Actually, I guess the best way to put it is, when we had the tip pinching with the sage, that picture, is you can tip pinch just that first node, or you could tip pinch 2 or 3, but all of it's new growth. So I would say cut back or tip pinch further back, because that's kind of what you're doing in the case of the manzanita, further back to have it actually respond stronger.
Okay, thank you.
But it is a slower growing thing. So, I mean, it's not going to like blast out like a, I'm making it seem like it's going to be like, oh, you're going to get all this new growth, but it will have a stronger response.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Jason, I can talk about gophers real quick. So I would recommend for gophers, they are most active in the morning and the like crepuscular dusk time. So you want to set your traps then. That's when they're active. And set your trap, don't leave it there for more than 24 hours. Like set it, check it in 24 hours. And if it's not there, move the trap. And what I normally do is if you see all the mounds, so gophers create these like mounds, but they typically plug their holes. So remove them all. If you can't tell which is a new mound, then flatten them all out so you can start fresh. And make sure when you're setting a trap, you're setting it in a fresh hole. So go out in the morning or go out at dusk and look for a fresh hole. And usually that means you'll see it's fresh because it's like the soil's nice and fresh, or a little bit moist because it's coming from below. And they're basically like they're making their tunnels, and then they have kind of their exit tunnels where they push all their soil out, and then they plug it up. So what I do is you find that plug, you'll see like a little like half moon volcano. And usually the volcano basically is indicating the direction. So this kind of like volcano spray side is going to indicate the opposite side where the tunnel is essentially. So essentially if it's like my hand is I'm trying to think of how I could, like this, my hand is the tunnel and it's shooting up and it's pushing all this soil out.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, the volcano will be over here. So you want to stick your hori, open this hole up and find this tunnel down here. And you could set the trap right here. Or, and I would actually recommend it, open the tunnel. If you're using a cinch trap, leave the tunnel open and put that cinch trap in, and then just leave it exposed. And they will show up because they're like, what the hell, there's a big open light, and they'll end up in the cinch trap. If you're using a Victor trap, which is smaller and like kind of more like a mouse trap, I usually go a bit deeper into the tunnel. So I try to find where the tunnel like actually reaches like the freeway, you know, like where they're moving around. And then I put it in the direction of that, you know, wherever that, you know, whichever way. If you have two, you can even put two in both ways and like, you know, increase your luck. And then in that case, I cover the hole. I put like cardboard down and I seal all the sides so no light gets in. And I get them every time.
Okay. So the cinch trap, you were saying where to put the cinch trap is further out of the hole.
The cinch trap would be the like exit hole, because the exit hole is just the one that leads to the surface. But if you dig down deep enough, there's like the actual like tunnel, you know?
Yeah.
So the cinch trap would be in the exit hole, and it's actually kind of sticking out of the soil, the big square part, because the cinch trap has like a big kind of back end. That is the part where that's where you're setting the trap. And so that part sticks out. Whereas the the Victor trap is skinny and slim, and you can actually put it all the way in the hole.
That's the one I have, yeah.
Yeah, the Victor trap, I actually like those better, but
I didn't cover up the hole.
Cover the hole and cover all the like light. It gets weird because I was taught to do it with no light, or sorry, because the cinch trap, you want to have it open to the air. So I was taught with the Victor trap to do the same thing, but I've never had success that way. And I always cover it, and like I said, man, it always works for me.
All right, I'll see what I can do. I'll report back. Thank you so much.
Nick says he sometimes uses smoke to get them out. Yeah, that's true. Sometimes also, ground squirrels are mistaken, but it sounds like that is not the case with Jason. Sounds like he's got gophers. And yeah, some people do use that spicy. I'm trying to remember the name of it. We used it for squirrels at a farm I used to work at. And it's basically like a very strong smelling granular thing that's not toxic, but it's the deterrent. I find that the ground squirrels are more susceptible to, or like they kind of avoid it, but gophers, honestly, my best success has been either trapping them or or cats, honestly.
I hate cats. All right, you gotta run.
So that's your option, is trapping them. And also traps can be more humane or like ecologically sound than any kind of toxic thing. Not that anyone's suggesting that, but toxic things, the kind of higher trophic level predators will then eat those poisoned gophers, and then you affect the whole food chain. Yeah, Arthur, mine too, man. My cat is like, I'm so proud of him as like my son, because he's really good at catching gophers. He doesn't catch anything else, so I feel like he learned well. But any other? So I think I cut you off, Jason, if you had something else you were gonna add. Oh yeah, someone mentioned, I know it's 7, I was well past 7, guys, so we can sign off. But I can talk about gophers all day long.
The gopher queen.
It's crazy, guys, but it's my only real huge skill. Okay, so let's wrap it up, and I will see everybody next week, or not next week, sorry. Friday for the last class, and that's going to be kind of like putting it all together, kind of garden assessments, and yeah, last class, guys.
Yeah, last
one. Milton, I'm sad too.
Yeah, all the certificates are printed and signed. Now we're just ready for Friday.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Nick, you said go-to for aphids. I like to do the strong water hose, like spray it really hard at them, and follow that up with the mild kind of watery soap. And I like to just kind of spray it and like make sure I get my fingers in there and rub it all over them. And that's what I usually do with them. And it really helps. That first application, if you get your fingers all over them and really douse them with it, it works pretty well. And then if it doesn't, you just kind of come back in 7 days, do it again. And usually like 3 or 4 applications really diminishes the population. Cool.
There are 2 spots left for the 10:30 slot.
Great.
Yeah.
So 2 spots, guys. Get in that class. Okay, so we'll see you Friday. Thanks, guys. Yeah, happy Tuesday.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Night, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Oops. Okay, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Brenda. I will see
All
you
right.
Friday.
Yeah, bud. Take care.
God willing, in the creek don't rise. Right?